And so the whole context of relationship with God is related to free will.
Yeah.
So he has automated worship, right? Because they're created for worship.
Yeah,
And
totally.
But there's a glory associated with my choice to worship.
Right.
And my choice to surrender. And my choice to love and serve God.
Right.
That elevates everything so that it's an authentic relationship and not a created servitude.
Totally. Hello, and welcome back to Now That'll Preach.
That'll preach.
I am Jared Crowley, your host, and I'm sitting across from Pastor David Freck. If you're new to That'll Preach, the idea is that we are giving Pastor David topics that you are sending in and asking him to preach a little 5 to 10 minute sermonette on it. The difference is, or I should say the catch is, that we do not give him any prep whatsoever.
No prep preaching.
So Pastor Heidi and I are the only ones looking at these, and we decide before we film them which ones we want to give you. So
all right, at your discretion. I have no veto power.
Yes,
apparently.
And this week's one is actually one I lobbied pretty hard for.
Okay.
The other ones I've had an idea, like my own idea going into it, of like my own thoughts on it. This one I have nothing. So
okay.
I'm very interested to hear what you have to say.
Lay it on me.
This week's question is, why did God create Satan?
All right, that's a good one. Well, the question is, did he create Satan, or was Satan a product of a choice of rebellion? So the origin of Satan is found in the fall, but not the fall of man, but the fall of the archangel Lucifer.
Right.
And so, Ezekiel and Isaiah describe this fall, talking about how all the instruments of music are in him. So there's the common thought that there was three primary archangels that kind of executed high-level response. So if you can think of even the structure of heaven outside of the Godhead, you know, I'm talking about angelic beings, seraphim, cherubim, archangels, which would be would represent high-level like general leaders, and then you have angels and so on and so forth. That they're there to execute specific purposes. So the archangels, we know of three of them: Lucifer, Michael, and Gabriel.
Okay.
Michael is a warring angel. Every time you see Michael in the scriptures, he's got the hosts of heaven and they're battling about something.
Okay.
Gabriel is a messenger angel, responsible for the gospel and the declaration of the prophetic declarations of God in unique situations. So he's the one that spoke to Joseph. He's the one that spoke to Mary. Blah blah blah. So and then other points in time throughout Scripture. And then Michael, who was clearly responsible for, or appears he was responsible for the worship of heaven.
Okay.
So we know that he made a decision in this environment where his heart was lifted up, and he said, "I will exalt myself above the throne of God." So did God know? Of course he did. So the idea of him creating Satan, Satan is the result of the fall of Lucifer from his responsibility and his rebellion in heaven. That's the result.
Gotcha.
So he becomes Satan. He becomes the antagonism of all that's evil, all that's dysfunctional, deception, lies, untruth, the distortion of men, the enemy of God. He is the result of a choice. So do archangels, then it comes to the other question, do archangels have the same power of choice that man does?
Right.
And that's the mystery.
Yeah, sure.
How you can be in that environment, be in the absolute purity of heaven, and this sinister seed boils in them to where they make this rebellious decision, and they fall along with a third of the angels, the hosts of heaven fall with them, is a pretty dynamic, pretty dynamic thought. It's a good it's a good question. It's a question that lots of people have opinions about, but to be real honest, that's really something we're not going to really know till we get to heaven and can really see it and know it in a perfect context. But you know, the question could be said of man in the same way, right? That you know, why would God let man sin? Well, God didn't let man sin. God let man have a choice. And so the choice, and so the whole context of relationship with God is related to free will. So he has automated worship, right? Because they're created for worship.
Totally.
But there's a glory associated with my choice to worship and my choice to surrender and my choice to love and serve God that elevates everything so that it's an authentic relationship and not a created servitude. So, so from that context, the choice is important. The purity of I choose God and I choose to worship Him. And in the context of Satan, who started off as Lucifer and the environment of worship, it's clear that, you know, all of this was found in him, all this glory, and he was such a dynamic created being by God. God created him with all this, such wonder and splendor, that at some point he become immersed and mesmerized in his giftedness, his ability, which was all God gifted, all God created. And that's the whole distortion of it, is that all of a sudden he started thinking it was about him instead of about the one he was created to worship. And it's the same plight of men when we begin to think we've done this ourselves. It's all about us, and we don't give glory to the Creator.
Absolutely.
And so that's what Romans talks about, Romans chapter 1, when it talks about, you know, the downfall of man, that even though they knew God, they didn't glorify him as God. They become vain or futile or empty in their imaginations. Their foolish hearts become darkened. Professing themselves to be wise, they become fools, talking about man. And the result of that attitude about, hey, I'm going to change what God looks like, and I'm going to change who God is to me to fit me being the exalted ruler of my own world. And then the consequence of that is, professing themselves to be wise, they become fools, and they change the glory of the incorruptible God into that which is like animals, birds, four-footed beasts, creeping things. And the consequence of that is we are given up to vile imaginations, and we descend into this abyss of sin and degradation because we see ourselves as the solution of all things. And
I don't think it's a coincidence that like Lucifer was an artist. You know what I mean? I think that's the easiest way to get that distorted view of God
this creativity, this, you know, the music and the, you know, the ability to format all this stuff for the glory of God, and then all of a sudden you think, man, that's awesome. Look at what I'm doing. And, you know, I deserve a higher
X,
level
Y, and Z.
and a higher. And so, you know, and where that thought comes from and how that thought germinated and how that decision, that process of rebellion took place. That's the wonder of it all. And I don't have a real ironclad answer for it. But I think to a greater or lesser degree, it reflects at a higher spiritual level even the realities that man has with God. So and so now Satan serves as, you know, the protagonist or the antagonist, excuse me, of everything that God is, and up until that ultimate judgment where him and all of his works and all of his efforts and all of his servants are thrown into the second death. And it's all over. You know, God concludes it all and says, okay, we're not going to have any more rebellion. So it's over, but it's because people have made decisions.
Exactly. No, I think it's so funny that, because I always hear like the pessimistic like viewpoint of like, when that question is asked, it's usually asked in a really negative way, like trying to kind of like show why God is an evil God. But it's actually, it's such a loving thing that he did by giving us choice. You know what I mean? But people see that.
The treasure of choice, right? The treasure of choice is, and this is what distinguishes us from every other created being. The treasure of choice is there's nothing manufactured. It's authentic. It's that's why when you choose a mate, you know, it's not just I have this emotion and I can't help myself. No, you can always help yourself.
Right, right.
You can always choose.
Yeah.
And so the choosing to love, the choosing to be devoted, that's the real glory of marriage.
Yeah.
And that's the real glory of a relationship with God.
Absolutely.
Is that I'm making those choices even when it's hard and even when it's difficult,
Yep.
even when things change. I'm
Yeah.
still making those choices. Right. And that's my highest praise.
Totally. Yeah.
Not just an action or expression, but
Right.
the highest praise that I give to God is that I constantly choose Him.
Yeah. Right.
And so that's the great lesson for all of us,
Yeah,
is to
totally.
constantly choose.
Yep.
Choose God, choose His way, choose His word.
Right.
Choose Him.
Yeah, absolutely.
And
I
when
mean,
you do that,
it means enough to Him that He was willing to take all that risk and knowing
lot of
everything that
risk.
was going to happen.
yeah,
to give
and
us
knowing
that.
what it was going to cost
Yep.
Him to offer us that.
Right. Right.
And you do that with later on you'll discover that when you do that with your children.
Right.
You give them choices, knowing what the possible consequences could be.
Right.
But if they can't grow in their maturity, and you can't grow in your relationship with them. You don't want that relationship to always be I'm controlling everything for them.
Absolutely.
You want them to grow into maturity,
Right.
and so that the relationship becomes more symbiotic instead of dependent.
Yeah.
And
for
so
sure.
God has the same attitude.
Yeah.
So hopefully that helps.
No, that's great. I did not expect it to go there, but that's super cool. Yeah, I love that.
All right.
Thank you, sir. All right.
My pleasure. Keep them coming.
Yeah, thank you guys for watching. Send in your topics. Give us some more of those. Give us some more of the harder ones.
Yeah, thanks for that.
We're trying to stump this guy.
No, I'm sure I'll be stumped. I'm sure I will be.
All right, guys. Well, have a great week. We will see you next Tuesday. I'll preach.
I'll preach.